are you, Ishmael? Where have you gone? I miss you so much since you left me and found a new king to worship, the Prophet Mohammed, whose name you say means the praised one. I know you were forced to leave your father Abraham's tent with your mother Hagar. Yet did I not become your father then? Moses knew that I did, which was why he wrote in the book of Genesis, and I quote, "And God was with the boy as he grew. He lived in the wilderness and became an archer." It was I, Yahweh, who became your personal father in replacement of Abraham. You knew, Ishmael, that this was so. You knew, Ishmael, that you were my treasured son, and that because you were, I, appearing as an angel, not only rescued you and your mother in the wilderness and set you firmly on your feet, I became your father. In fact, I told your mother Hagar, even before you were born, to name you Ishmael. I gave you 12 tribes, just as Isaac had 12 tribes. I talked with you every day, just as your earthly father, Abraham, would have talked to you had you remained in his tent like Isaac. I spoke to you, and you listened. That is why I named you one who listens. Because listen, you and your descendants would have to do to fulfill your divine destiny. You listened because you knew that because I became your father, I had a specific plan for you and your 12 tribes, and that you could hardly be considered, therefore, a castaway. You knew that even though Isaac was the one who received his father Abraham's blessing, a blessing which by right should have gone to you because you were Abraham's firstborn, I, Yahweh, had a specific plan for you and consequently your descendants to carry out, because the unique talents I gave you were so that only your seed could fulfill this specific task, a task like none other. Out of Isaac's seed would come the promised one of the ages, Jesus Christ. Out of your seed, Ishmael, would come the rescuer of the promised one of the ages, the infant Christ. Oh yes, you knew, Ishmael. That was why you helped Isaac bury Abraham when that great patriarch returned to me after a long life. You knew because I told you when I became your father, and you listened. You, in turn, told your children, who told their children, who told their children down through the ages. In fact, you knew me as father long before my chosen people knew me, the children of Isaac, the Hebrews, because my son, Jesus Christ, who came to earth thousands of years later, said that he had come to show mankind the Father, who I am. In fact, he said that he and I, the Father, were one. You knew I had set you aside, not to disinherit you from your father Abraham's blessings and great wealth, which you were not, but rather to become your father first, so as to prepare you and your descendants exclusively for the task of not only saving the promised one of the ages from a wicked Arab king named Herod, but also of establishing forever on earth this promised one's kingship. Herod was an Arab because both of his parents were Arab, and yet he was a practicing Jew because he had been influenced by those same stories passed down through the ages from you, Ishmael, about me, the one true, invisible God, whom Abraham first recognized, and how the promised one of the ages would be born in Bethlehem of Judea, of a Jewish virgin, and redeem the whole of mankind. Herod's father, an Edomite, was rich and influential, having been blessed by me, Yahweh, his father. However, when Pompey invaded Palestine in 63 BCE, he abandoned me and supported Pompey, deriving great favors from Rome as a consequence, thus ensuring that in the year 37 BCE, his son, Herod the Great, would become the unchallenged ruler of Judea. By doing this, Herod's father effectively disinherited himself and consequently his son from your royal line, Ishmael, your kingship. Herod the Great, like his father, also abandoned Yahweh. That was why he was determined his title would remain unchallenged throughout Judea. What he did not realize, of course, was that 3 Arab kings who never ceased to listen to their Father in heaven, unlike he, would be summoned by a singular star, which I, Yahweh, threw into the eastern sky for them alone to discern as to its meaning, because they loved me, their Father, up, whom they first knew. Oh yes, these 3 Arab kings were indeed wise men, like their earthly father Abraham, and yet they were more. They were royal princes, as I have already stated, a fact which my faithful prophet Moses documented in the book of Genesis, which was written by this great deliverer of my Hebrew children enslaved in Egypt. In fact, Moses quoted my exact words to Hagar, Ishmael's mother, second wife of Abraham, as follows: "And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 tribes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation." In other words, I not only became your father, Ishmael, I proclaimed your sons to be princes, making it clear that I never cast you away, and that someday your descendants, 3 kings, would be able to have direct access to the wicked King Herod, discern that he was evil, and consequently save the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So, unlike Herod, who was neither king of the Jews nor the Arabs, these 3 Arab wise men were kings, being, I repeat, the direct descendants of your royal line, Ishmael, as established by myself. They, like you, Ishmael, and your 12 princely tribes, knew and studied the stars. And when Hebrew scriptures were written and promulgated abroad, your princely tribes studied them, including their own oral and written traditions, passing these works down to your 3 wise men of Babylonia. Your descendants also listened to the Hebrew prophets of old down through the centuries that followed. Because of that rich tradition, these 3 kings knew that that lone star heralded a birth of a divine nature, that another king was about to be born who would be the promised one of the ages. They knew too, Ishmael, that I, Yahweh, their father, wanted them to travel to Israel and do homage to this promised child born to a Hebrew maiden, a virgin, and play a vital role in ensuring that this infant king would be established safely in his kingship, not just for that time, but for all time. Their mission was preordained when I, the father, became your father. And you, Ishmael, knew this when the angel rescued you and your mother, Hagar, that day in the wilderness. You knew then, Ishmael, why I delayed the fulfillment of my promise made to Sarah and Abraham to give them a son in their old age. It was because you had to be born first. Otherwise, you never would have been born. And you had to be born for the fulfillment of my ultimate plan for the whole of mankind. The Gentiles were called a no people by Moses. However, Moses knew your people, the Ishmaelites, were a people especially ordained by me, your father, to rescue in the far distant future another king in his infancy, the King Emmanuel, God with us. Just like Moses was rescued in his infancy by, in that instance, an Arab Egyptian princess. An Arab princess rescued the great Hebrew prophet Moses when he was a baby, just like 3 Arab kings rescued the King of Kings in his infancy. In other words, you were not a no people like the Gentiles. You were an all-essential yes people, princes and kings in my royal courts. So these 3 Arab kings set out at night on their camels loaded with supplies, plus 3 unique gifts for the infant king of Judea, trusting in that lone star which they knew I, their father, was steering probably, ultimately, to Bethlehem, where this baby king had been foretold to be born. Of course, being kings from a distant land, they followed the protocol of the day and visited first Herod, the king of Judea, the 3 kings being aware that he was a practicing Jew like themselves. King Herod, we are told in the Christian Gospels, welcomed them with open arms, which he was obliged to do, they being kings. He then asked them to return to him once they had found the child king and tell him where he was so that he too could visit him and worship him. Being wise men, however, it did not take long for these kings, descended from your 12 Arab tribes of princely sons, Ishmael, to discern that Herod was an evil man, intent on killing this tiny king, whose birth he had just learned from these descendants of yours was imminent if it had not already occurred. So they paid him no heed. They listened only to God's directions. They were more than just scholars, you see, Ishmael, because being on an intimate basis with me, the Father, like you had been, they not only discerned the stars and the heavens and applied the signs thereof to Moses' words and the words of Isaiah and other Hebrew prophets who predicted this divine child's coming. They discerned Satan when they met him in Herod. Some say my wise men were Persians, or from China, or from Greece. But none of these countries knew Hebrew scriptures like the scholars of Babylonia. And none knew astronomy like they, nor how it applied to these scriptures. Besides, Greece lay to the west of Israel, and I placed my star for these Arab kings exclusively in the east over southern Babylonia, it being almost directly west of Jerusalem, where I was directing it to go. It was seen then most clearly in the Babylonian night sky. These were your kings, Ishmael, your children. So why do you worship one whom you call Mohammed, the praised one? Why? Where have you gone, my beloved Ishmael? My sweet, sweet Ishmael. Where have you gone? Why do you no longer listen? Don't you know it was these 3 kings, your direct descendants, who gave warning to my Hebrew children, Joseph and Mary, about the evil King Herod's intent to kill the infant Christ, their baby, and that they should take the babe and flee to Egypt? A warning backed up by a similar one given by my angel to Joseph in a dream he had that very night. Don't you know, Ishmael, that those 3 kings gave that promised baby of the ages, not only frankincense for his kingship, and myrrh to predict his suffering on the cross one day in the future, but also gold, precious gold, so that this poor Hebrew family might flee the coming horror Herod was about to inflict upon the Hebrew male children of Judea under 2 years of age. They fled as directed to Egypt. They fled from the promised land with the promised one of the ages to Egypt occupied by Arabs who were the descendants of the Pharaoh from whom Moses fled with his freed Hebrew slaves eons before to the Sinai and eventually the promised land. Ironic, is it not? I, your father, really do work in mysterious ways to fulfill my marvelous purpose for everyone. That is why my faithful apostle Paul said, God has included us all in disbelief so that he might include us all in belief. Don't you know, Ishmael, that because of these 3 Arab kings from Babylonia, the Holy Family found safety in the same Arab country of Egypt from where their prophet Moses liberated their ancient Hebrew ancestors. Moses, who was rescued also as an infant, I repeat, by an Arab, an Egyptian princess. It would not be until about 2 years later, when this my beloved family had learned that Herod had died, did Joseph dare return to Judea with the child and his mother, having learned that just before he expired, a few years after they had fled to Egypt, this evil Arab king of Judea, Herod the Great, slaughtered all Jewish boys, 2 years and younger, the innocents, in an attempt to kill the baby Emmanuel, whom he thought was still in Judea. Truly, those 3 wise men discerned well the evil intent of Herod. Truly, they saved the life of the divine infant king. Truly, as a child, my son Emmanuel heard these stories from his parents as he grew up in Nazareth, in Israel, where his family settled. Stories about how 3 Arab kings saved his life, having traveled all the way from Babylonia to do so, as directed by God's wonderful star. Truly, he heard how Yahweh knew that these Arab kings would go to meet Herod first, and that they would discern well his evil intent. That was one reason why I, the father, named the sons of Ishmael princes, as alluded to, their royal lineage, therefore, giving them direct access to even kings. The other reason being to inculcate upon your mind, Ishmael, that you were absolutely a yes person. Truly, Jesus, my son, and his parents kept in contact with his Arab saviors over the years. Truly, Jesus learned as a child how my 3 kings, who had descended from your 12 tribes, recognized me in my only begotten Son, precisely because their father was the great I am, just as they recognized Satan and Herod again, because their father was I am. Of course, my son understood why this was, because he knew even then that he had come to the Hebrew people and eventually the whole of mankind to reveal the Father, for he and the Father were one. So you, Ishmael, recognized me, your father, in my son. My son Jesus knew too that the temple built by King David to worship me, Yahweh, would someday be overtrampled by another massive structure. The Dome of the Rock, the Mosque of Omar, in which Mohammed would be worshipped instead by Ishmael's descendants. The book of Matthew in the New Testament quotes my son's exact words on this confiscation. Quote, "When ye therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains." End of quote. The Hebrews were to flee into the mountains because all of them would be slaughtered by Omar, a follower of Mohammed, if they remained, which many were, who were not able to flee fast enough. My son wanted the Hebrews to be scattered to every corner of the earth, where they would be relatively safe, until he made the way for them 2,000 years later to return to their native soil. So, your descendants, Ishmael, would worship Allah and proclaim the so-called praised one, the first of all the prophets, even before Moses, and my only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. They did this despite the fact that they knew me, Yahweh, as their Father long before the chosen people of God, the Jews, long before my Son came to reveal to the world, through his wonderful works of healing, his messages about truth, and his death and subsequent resurrection, who he was, me, the Father, who allowed his only begotten Son to die in mankind's stead. Ishmael, my sweet, sweet Ishmael, how could that be? Of course, I know the answer to that question. I know that like the Jews who were slaughtered if they did not manage to escape in time to the mountains, your precious children were slaughtered too, beheaded, because you refused to bow to this impostor who demanded that you accept him as the praised one. To save the lives of the rest of your beautiful children and your wife and young daughters from kidnap and rape, you did the unthinkable. You submitted to this tyrant's demands. But now, I want you to come back to me, because I am not only your Father, I am not only your Creator, I am not only your Lord, I am your Redeemer who died on the cross for you. You who rescued me so that I could rescue you and the whole world. Listen, Ishmael, for that is the name I gave you. Listen. Mohammed never died for you. Blood has to be shed for the atonement of men's sins. My blood was the final atonement. Your descendants made my death and resurrection possible by sparing my life in my humble cradle, so that I might one day cradle death on the cross to rescue a perishing world. My gift of myrrh came from your sons, Ishmael, so that I might give my gift, my conquering of death for all men, for all time. The Star of Bethlehem, Ishmael, still beckons your Arab tribes, albeit not to follow at this time to a manger in Bethlehem, for now it shines over Zion, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Out of that spectacular star is the voice of my son calling too from that temple site, first purchased by King David. Listen to him calling, Ishmael, Ishmael, come and save me, Ishmael. Why do you persecute me and my brothers, indeed your brothers the Jews? Save me, Ishmael, my beautiful cousin. Save your father, and you will save yourself and the whole of mankind forever, because without my fatherhood, you would never have survived. It was true that because I was God, I could save myself. But I, God the Father, wanted you, Ishmael, to save me, the Father, in my Son. I wanted you to save us from evil. Firstly, when my son was entirely vulnerable and weak, so that he might one day save the world while vulnerable and broken on the cross of Calvary. And finally, when the time for his return to earth drew near. That was why you had to be born, don't you see? That was why, too, you had to be forced from your father Abraham's tent. It was because I, Yahweh, wanted to be your personal father, so that you would recognize that supernova someday as being a sign from me and follow it to the Christ child, my only begotten son, your cousin, and finally to the Temple Mount, which you must now rescue. For that temple must once again be occupied by the law, the word which I am. Why abandon now such a king, such a wondrous Lord, for a mere prophet who has usurped my temple site in Judea, just as Herod did of old. Why, it was your descendants, Ishmael, who first proclaimed my son Jesus a king when they gave him the gift of frankincense. My 3 wise men were the first to do so. My Hebrew shepherds recognized his divine birth and that he was the promised one of the ages. But the 3 kings of Babylonia recognized my son as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, even though he lay not in a comfortable cradle in a palace, but in a mere manger in a barn with the animals. These kings proclaimed his kingship over all kings from that exceedingly lowly place. How wise your wise men were, Ishmael. They were not fooled by appearances. Any other kings would have passed that humble stable by, but not the 3 wise men. These marvelous descendants of yours, Ishmael, then saved my son's life for his death and resurrection. They saved the resurrection and the life, for that is who Jesus is, and also who I am, for I am one with my son. So, Ishmael, your descendants saved me too, their father of old, Ishmael. Ishmael, save me again. Save me again by circumventing this second Herod's wishes and preparing the way for my son's return. Help him to lay claim to his kingdom on earth, to which I assigned him at the beginning of time. Do this by liberating my temple site from that man who claimed Jesus predicted his coming, that one who claimed Christ said that one who would come after him would be named the Praised One. My son did not say this, Ishmael. He did say, however, from the cross of Calvary, "It is finished." There was none other to come after him, for he fulfilled all the prophecies in himself for all time. You will not have to follow a special star this time to save an infant king. Just listen to its call, the call of Christ. You only have to find the truth in his words, for he is the Word and the truth made flesh, as well as the resurrection and the life. I am waiting, Ishmael. I am waiting for you, my beautiful, my sweet Ishmael. I am longing for you. Can you not hear me calling your name as I have always done down through the corridors of time? I have a new sign now to herald my son's return, his second coming, along with my star of Bethlehem. My new sign is the return of the Jewish people, your cousins, after 2,000 years to their ancient homeland Israel. Can you not realize this? If you cannot, it is because you can no longer discern the signs. But that is your calling alone, your express calling, a vocation ordained by me before you were born, Ishmael, to discern the signs of my coming and to rid the way of any impediments so that I may do so. I set you aside and your descendants as a princely people for this purpose alone. You saved the infant king born to a young virgin Jewess. Now, save the King of Kings and Lord of Lords as you have been preordained to do. That is right. You heard me. Preordained. I have been coming to you, Ishmael, in this latter day in dreams. I want you to save me now for my mission ahead. Only you can. Rescue my temple once more, this time from a second Herod, the alleged prophet Mohammed, so that I might sit on my throne there forever. Seek and find me, for I am very near to you as I have always been. I have always been your up, your father, the Word whose earthly dwelling place is the temple site, Mount Moriah, where Abraham was willing to sacrifice his only son, but it was I who would be the sacrifice because of Abraham's obedience to the one he recognized as the unseen God. Ishmael, Ishmael, oh my sweet, sweet Ishmael, listen and do what only you can do. Do not be fooled by this second Herod, but recognize Jesus again, the meek and lowly, not as the infant king born in a stable this time, but as the King of Kings who must lay claim to his throne on earth for all time. A foul branch of this second Herod, named the Islamic Syrian Iraqi state, is murdering the innocents again, many of them now being Arab children who are descendants of you, Ishmael. They are killing too Jewish and Christian children, as well as other Gentile children. Imagine, this second Herod feels threatened by these innocents, just like the first Herod felt threatened by the innocent Jewish children of his day. He feels threatened too by Gentile Christians and is currently slaughtering them en masse along with his cousins, the Jews. He feels threatened even by me. Moses predicted this ugly branch would be born, who would not be the true Ishmaelites, although he did not name the source of the branch, which is obviously Herod the Great. In the book of Genesis, he wrote, I quote, "He will be a wild donkey of a man. He will be hostile to everyone, and everyone will be hostile to him. He will live away from his brothers." Unquote. This second Herod wants to usurp my son's throne so that my son will never reign on earth as I reign in heaven. But reign we will, both on earth and in heaven. Oh yes, Ishmael, Yeshua HaMashiach, God the Son, the lowly infant king born in a stable, is returning to claim for himself forever what is rightfully his. Planet Earth and all who dwell therein. You are going to help my son's upcoming reign, Ishmael, by removing from my temple site the chief obstacle to his doing so, the second Herod, the false prophet. Mohammed's following have closed the eastern gates to the temple to prevent me from entering. But the true Ishmaelites will open those gates and allow the Jews, my chosen people, to rebuild the Temple of Solomon. They are my chosen people, because out of their seed would come the promised one of the ages, and also because they received my word given to their prophet Moses, the word they protected and enshrined forever in the Ark of the Covenant, placed in the temple site, my holy site, which was snatched away, stolen by the second Herod, Mohammed. You, Ishmael, and your princely descendants are my listening people, my rescuers, because the mission of the Ishmaelites has been and is to rescue forever the Word made flesh and assist in the establishment of his kingdom here on earth. Jesus could remove those locks on those gates through which he will someday soon enter. But I know you will do it, Ishmael, in advance of his return, because you care about me, your father of old. You have to, for I am your father who saved you from the wilderness and set your feet solidly in the land I gave you, a land that extends from the Dead Sea to the eastern borders of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, from the Indian Ocean, the Gulfs of Aden and Persian, and even embracing Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, and Mesopotamia. How then can you begrudge the children of Isaac their tiny land, and even claim their temple site as belonging to the second King Herod? The temple site where the 3 wise men worshiped too whenever they traveled to Israel, because they practiced the Hebrew faith. This was before they were given their divine mission by me, their father, to save my precious son. Come home, Ishmael, for I am yours, and you are mine. Come home, dear one, for I can never forget Abraham's firstborn, never. Your descendants recognized me not only as the Almighty, unseen God, beginning with Abraham, but also as a tiny vulnerable babe, wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger with the animals nearby. You recognize the invisible King just like Abraham did. What Abraham did not know was that by recognizing the Almighty Father, although unseen, he was also recognizing Yahweh's Son, yet to be born. The Hebrew prophets who would come after him would be the ones to recognize this infant king yet to come, one who would save the whole world from sin and death. Come home, Ishmael, and never, never leave me again. I am still the invisible king, but soon every eye will see me when I return, because satellites which surround the earth will reveal me as I do so. Rescue your true king, your invisible Lord again, Ishmael, as the King of Kings ready to occupy his temple throne. I, Emmanuel, am patiently waiting just for you, my beloved, my sweet, sweet Ishmael, my rescuer for all time. Come and rescue me one last time. I wrote an endnote to this piece between June the 30th and July the 4th, 2015. The Star of Bethlehem appeared in the heavens, the first time in approximately 2,000 years. Actually, more like 2012 years, because Christ was born around 2 BC. I finished this poem July the 5th, 2015, having begun to write it the end of April, beginning of May 2015. Was this a coincidence? If so, it was a most remarkable one. A sign? Probably. But who was the sign for? The Arabs, of course, and none other. As of old, it was also a sign of the imminent return of a king, the imminent return of Christ.